Hello everyone, I am Jonathan, also known as the Medieval Genie, and today we're going to talk about a topic that's quite dear to me. It's a subject of hand carving. Now, by that I mean attacks that target anything from the fingers up to the upper arms. And the reason, well, there are many reasons that I do it really, but the number one sort of distilled reason is quite simply, I want to hit someone without being hit. It's as simple as that. Now, of course, there are more valuable targets. If I was, let's say, imagining this was some sort of duel to the death at dawn, and I managed to thrust through the heart or cut down into the forehead or somewhere like that. Yes, it's a more valuable target, and whether we're looking at scoring in some sort of tournament setting, or whether we're looking at something more of a martial, something, like I said, something that was a historical battle, or some sort of duel, or self-defense, or something like that, then yes, you're going to cause more injury or get more points or whatever in the immediate sense from getting somewhere like those deeper targets. But really, it seems like it's not a good idea if you're going to aggressively try to get that sort of hit clumsily, and then in the meantime you receive a grievous injury yourself, perhaps even leading to some sort of double or something. And bearing in mind there are examples of historical duels where two people did indeed kill each other, even if one person died before the other. Maybe there was a more immediate death and then one person got some sort of severe infection, stabbed to the gut or something like that. The fact of the matter is, two people kill each other and there's no real winner in the end. So instead, getting something where you're having a distinct advantage is something that I prefer. So over the time I have been practicing and distilling my techniques, and one thing that's come out a lot is being able to target those forward targets a lot more easily. So there are lots of ways you can do this, and I'll go over them now. So, when you're trying to do the hand carve, or just trying to sort of hit someone without being hit, two key things come up immediately. One is distance, one is timing. It's really easy stuff. This is one of the good things. I don't need some partner in the pandemic we've got at the moment with the COVID-19 and all that. It's very easy to describe without needing a partner. So, firstly, we'll talk about distance. So, as you can imagine, quite often, if we're sword fighting or we're using spears or any weapons, even if we're doing stuff more unarmed, and I'm wanting to maybe target us grappling around the hands or whatever, what happens is usually, as the person's fighting, whether they're doing something to attack or defend, their hands at some point will end up in front of them. With something like military saber or small sword, you'll see the hands in front of them most of the time, whereas maybe with something like Messer, which is a type of one-handed sword in the medieval period, you might be looking at something that is more occasional. But when someone is attacking and defending in some sort of active way, they do at some point need to put those hands in front of them. And not wishing to state the obvious too much here, but during those times, of course, to whatever extent, the hands and the forearms are further forward than the rest of the body, just quite simply. And even when you consider the legs, when a person's lunging and extending forward, because of the way the body mechanics work, it actually still requires a lot more reach to get to the legs. And that's simply because with people, even if you're looking at someone noticeably taller or shorter, I don't really need to do much to raise or lower my hands. So you'll notice as I raise and lower my hand to a higher or lower target, I'm not extending quite as far forward. So it's a little bit, it doesn't make much difference on this sort of angle if I'm targeting somewhere quite level with me, or maybe slightly higher or slightly lower, whereas if I'm targeting at the legs, my reach is significantly less, and I need to do something like lean forward, or extend with my own legs, or otherwise bring my body forward so that I can reach down to their legs and shins. This is not a good idea necessarily, and there are many instances where in fact it can lead to, instead of you're reaching this supposedly forward target, targeting the legs can actually lead to you getting struck instead. There was one I saw in a more of a Scottish sort of depiction, and it showed something that's very common. The person who's having their legs attacked pulls that front leg back and then just strikes down on the person's head. So this person thinks, this target's in front of them, and they try to go and reach it, but then they bring their own body so far forward, the other person just takes their leg out of the way, whack. Very easy head hit, and a very frequent occurrence. Whether you're using a one-handed weapon, a two-handed weapon, something that cuts, or something that thrusts, it doesn't matter. The concept still applies. So with something like the hands, it's much more preferable because, like I said, you're not reaching down and having this poor reach. You're reaching fairly, mostly or wholly, in front of you. So with that distance, when I'm reaching to attack someone like the hands, it's much easier to reach them. Additionally, it means that you can be at a different range. Now, this is something that can be part of feinting. Now, people call feinting, usually when they describe it, they're talking about a pretend attack, but really it's any kind of deception. And one of the good ways to do a feint, a deception of the opponent, is to pretend a distance. Now, this is where we go back to the hand carving, because when you've got people who are sort of doing their pretend attacks, or maybe they're trying a real hit and it's not working, they're sort of gauging distance, they're trying these thrusts, trying these cuts, nothing of too much commitment, maybe someone does commit, but then there's parrying, riposting, all of this stuff going on, and there's this general exchange going on. But the thing is, they're establishing a distance. You and the opponent are getting an idea of how far you and your weapon can reach, how far they and their weapon can reach, and a general idea of when someone's in range to get hit. And it means that this can be something you can play with. So if you're trying to, again, target somewhere further back, like the head or the torso, then you're giving this sort of measure. You need to be reaching, with the weapon coming from this direction, you need to reach at least this deep. So whether I, the opponent, am bringing myself closer to you, or whether you, the attacker, are bringing yourself closer to me, and whatever circumstances are happening, I know that when you try to hit me in the head or the torso, you need to reach here. But this is a great way to trick them, because now they're expecting that as long as this is out of reach, so I stand here, I think if I'm this far away, I'm going a little bit back, you can't hit me. That's the assumption. And that's good. You want the opponent to assume things, because that's an opportunity to exploit their weaknesses in their assumptions. So while they're busy thinking that you cannot hit them, you can hit them. That's the best bit. So with a person who's there, you're targeting somewhere like the head and the torso and the legs, these things, you're struggling. Maybe you can't reach them because their defense is too good, or maybe they're so aggressive that when you close in, they're going to easily hit you, and maybe you're forced to parry, or you get struck, or whatever's happening. So while all that's happening, you find an opportunity at any point where they bring their hands in front of their torso with something like a military saber or a small sword. Again, this happens a lot more frequently. Or with something like an arming sword or something like that, it happens less frequently, but it will happen at some point. At that moment, you then hit them. And this has led to some beautiful exchanges that I've had. For example, one of my classic ones is an identical hit. Well, an identical attack. So this is one I've had actually very recently. I think it was in my last sparring, and I explained it to the guy afterwards because he was newer. But it was very simply this. It was a normal, what we might call an Oberhau or Fendente attack if you're used to HEMA, but if you're not, just basically, we had two-handed swords on the shoulders, like this, kind of like a baseball bat. He swung downwards, you know, the sort of thing that you'd expect to maybe cut through the head or the shoulders, and then come out maybe around the hips or something like that. That sort of angle of attack. He swung. I swung in exactly the same way. I was on the shoulder, I did the diagonal cut. I hit. He did not hit. Why? Because he swung. He aimed for, I don't know, it was somewhere between my head and my torso. We were out of range for this. He missed. As this happened, I swung, I targeted his arms, I hit. At that exact moment, there is a point during that swing that we were doing at the same time, where his hands are in front of him, at the same time as my hands are in front of me. He misses because he's aiming for all this. I hit because this set of arms in front of him was a much closer target. So there was all of this extra reach that I could use between where he wanted to target and where I wanted to target. So I got a clean hit. I received no injury. He received the full injury. And it was quite a firm hit as well, because it was a proper, well-structured attack. It wasn't, like a little tippy-tap type of thing. So that's one example of where you can exploit the distance. Now, when it comes to the timing, that's the second thing I've mentioned. When it comes to the timing, again, this isn't something too difficult. We've got what I've heard in German are called like the Nacht and the Vor and the Indus or something like that. But it's basically the before, the during, and the after. So in the before, that's basically the before. That's the idea that maybe the opponent's thinking, I'll do these things, or what will I do? Maybe I'll do a cut, maybe a thrust. What can I do? Oh, I've got lots of options. And then you just go, screw this. You hit them. That's the before. The during kind of describes itself, just like that exchange I described. He's swinging, I'm swinging at the same time. Bam! During his attack, I've attacked and I've hit him. That's the during, because, like it says, it's in the middle. We're both doing something, and the person who's done it better wins. Then there's the after, well, you can imagine. So that would be an example I've done in things like the main melee before. So a person overcommits their attack, and this is again where the hand carve comes in fantastically, because with the timing, it could well be they swing, and this is not movies or television where someone goes, whoa, and then, they're completely off and they can't do anything. The reality is, instead of requiring half a year to get up off the floor, if a person swings and misses, or they've swing and they've been parried, they're going to recover in about, say, half a second. I've never really measured it in exactitude, but it's a little bit of time between they've attempted their attack or their defense and they recover back to neutral again. No one's doing anything. In that little bit of time, you can hit them. So it would be something like, person swings, they go whoosh, you go whoosh, get them. Really simple stuff. And again, this is where the hand carve comes in handy, because I mentioned about distance earlier, where you can reach, where not only is it easier to reach their hands and forearms than their head, torso and legs, but additionally you can, instead of having to close the range to get those deeper targets, it's also faster. So of course, like I said, the person swings, they recover. You don't want to be attacking them while they've already recovered, because if you do that, what will happen is they swing, you swing, they parry. Oh, we're back to, you're doing riposte and all of this messy exchange happens and hope that you win. Whereas they swing, you do a quick hit, you just immediately target their hand or their forearm or their elbow or something that's happened just after they've swung, and then, or after they've committed some sort of thrust or parry or something like that. Then in that little bit of time after, you get a hit. And like I said, I've sort of hinted at this, it doesn't have to be that they've timed an attack and then you do it after that. It could well be that they do some sort of parry, and this is where the feints and the pretend attacks work. So one of my favourites is just doing 1-2, which is just simply, I do a convincing attack that looks like I'm trying to cut from my dominant side, and then by the time they've tried to parry it, they've put their hands forward. The best bit, when they put their hands forward and their sword in the way, and then while they're trying to do that, no, I've gone to the other side. Which means if a person's trying some sort of parry, usually there's some sort of opening. You'll notice if you look at my body now, ugly as it may be, I try some sort of thing. This is an outside parry in military saber. You'll notice if someone attacks like this, I parry them. Whereas if they pretend to attack and then go in, there's a target further forward than the rest of my body. Same with this, an inside parry. They try to target around here, of course they're getting parried, whereas if they pretended and then there's all this. There have also been other instances where a person tries something. One that I tried and actually surprised me was a man who did a Guard of St. George in British military sabre, which is the sword is raised above the head, so it forms a sort of horizontal bar above the head. I sort of did a little bit of a feint, sort of half committed, and I noticed they'd already reacted very quickly to me. They were just too fast for me. I was thinking maybe I'll hit their head. Nope. They reacted, they raised their sword up in front of their head, so if I tried committing, it'd just be ding, I land on top of their sword, no injury, and I've probably exposed myself to take a riposte. I instead stopped my attack short as they'd raised their hand, and then instead of going and trying to bear down on them, onto their sword, I sort of lowered my hand a little bit and then struck forwards in a sort of a snapping motion, and it meant instead of landing around here, on top of the blade, or around here, we imagine the knuckles of my fist are. Of course, that would be landing on a military sabre, that's landing on a basket, it's a protected guard, you can't do anything through there. I instead struck forward. So it was a bar that was going over the hand like that. So I simply had cut in front of me, under the bar. So when people think of military sabres, they usually imagine that you cannot hit the hands. This is wrong. If you've got something like a Scottish basket hilt or a mortuary hilt, you've got this 180-degree protection. It works, but you get less manoeuvrability and whatnot because of the fact that it can obstruct the hand a bit. But most sabres don't quite have this much protection. You'll see on some Victorian-style sabres they'll have a good degree of protection where it kind of protects the outside of the hand and then goes all the way to in front of the hand. But then on the bit where the sort of the tips of the fingers are, on the inside, is exposed. Or you'll see a simpler knuckle bow, like on the 1796 light cavalry sabre. The knuckle bow is just a bar of metal, so if someone attacked and then a parry was being done, it's better than a cross guard because it protects the hand, but there's still a lot of area on the outside of the hand and on the inside of the hand completely exposed. So again, even when a person looks like they've got hand protection, the hand carve still works. And with something like a bigger 180-degree protection basket hilt, you know what? The wrists are still very close by and they're completely exposed. So just consider that as well. So in terms of other general techniques, let me think. So yeah, we've got the key things I've covered there are distance and timing. Those play a massive part. But apart from that, it's also a matter of, you can do things like feinting. So I've mentioned about pretend attacks, pretending distance. Yeah, I noticed that if you're attacking an opponent, one of two things will typically happen. Either when you launch your attack, they flinch, they react, they want to parry it to stop the attack. Or they don't react. Perhaps you've been swinging and you're out of range. So it's like if the camera right now is you and I try to punch you, how much do you react to this? Nothing at all, because you can see, even if you imagined you actually were there where the camera is now, this hand of mine cannot punch the camera. I'm not some sort of elastic arms man. Same sort of principle applies. If you're attacking out of range with a weapon, the person just will not react anymore. But you can exploit this, because again, feinting distance. You can pretend that you're out of range. You're doing these actions, and you just keep doing the feints, keep again, again. And if your opponent's flinching a lot, and they're trying to defend the stuff that you're doing, then at that point, they open themselves up with, they defend something, so you do something else. If they're not reacting, then you simply lull them into a lovely sense of comfort and you have them underestimate you. And it's very useful for people like myself. You get some fighters, they have a very threatening presence and they're very intimidating. And usually this leads to a flinch response. So with those sorts of intimidating fighters, they usually find themselves doing better if they attack and then they scare the person into reacting, and then they do something else, and then of course they've lured the person into defending one thing while they attack something else. With someone like myself, who has less of a threatening presence, shorter, not quite so not so angry, and got too much of a girly voice for it, instead what will happen is the person will just stop reacting to you. That's fine. In that case, when they stop reacting to you, you can basically get a free hit. You will attack them out of the blue, and they will not even realise that they were supposed to react. So whichever happens, whether they're flinching more to you, and you just use a different angle to exploit, or whether you use a lack of response, in which case you just get a free hit, it doesn't matter. In any case, there will be advantages that come up. And again, with areas like the hands and forearms, you can get an easier hit, whether you're catching them by surprise with that feint that you've scared them into, or whether you're lulling them into a false sense of confidence and you're catching them out. It's quicker and easier to reach for those sneaky targets than it is to try and go for something like the head and torso, because I might, just with that extra little bit of time required to go for a deeper target, and also the sort of the body language you're doing. If I just do something like this, it's just all you're seeing is maybe a little bit of movement of the hand and the torso. Whereas if I'm doing all of this and reaching in, you're seeing all of my body coming towards you. So it gives more of a, not just more time to react, but it's also giving more clues that something bad is about to happen to the opponent. So again, that's another reason why I prefer the hands and forearms, because if you clue in the opponent to what you're trying to do, that you're trying to do something to them, they usually have extra time and extra warning in terms of signals that they need to react, and then they will do something against you and counter you. You don't want that, of course, so instead I want to give them as little of a hint as possible and give them as little time to react to that hint as possible. Get them, be out of there before they've even had a chance to say what. So that's the basic sort of tactical sense of the hand carve. I might talk about more of the physical techniques at a later date. I hope that was useful to you, and I shall see you later. Ta-ra for now.
You there! Where are all the Christians hiding?